gentlemen, members and guests, it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker tonight, who is going to talk about a post-lockdown cruise around Ireland in a beautiful Bowman 40. David Clements has been a member for many years, and I look forward to, I've heard a few stories of his trip, but I really look forward to hearing it in toto. Hey. Thank you, David.
Thank you. First of all, I apologise if I cough, because I'm recovering from a cold. I hope I'll be okay. And also, thank you very much to all my loyal crew over the years and their wives who've turned up tonight, which is great. I think I'm about 2/3 of the audience, probably.
And husbands.
Yes, and husbands indeed. Thank you, David. Thank you for correcting me. I'm very sorry. Yeah, I think this is about the 5th or 6th of my Bagheera cruise talks that I've done here. And I have done an Ireland one before, so those of you who've seen it before, I do apologise. It's a big decision for me every year as to where to go with Bagheera, and Ireland wins more often than anywhere else because it is the most extraordinary place to go and sail, and I really can't get enough of it, in spite of some of the issues. So the 2022 cruise was planned in 3 legs. First leg was from Dartmouth going up to Dingle, because I had a break in between. I usually do it in legs, and I come home because there are usually things to do, like sorting out the garden and apologising to Dinah for being away. In planning any cruise to the wild west of Ireland, if you want to leave the boat, you've got to plan carefully, because there aren't many places that you can leave a boat safely on the west coast of Ireland. But Dingle is one of them, and it's a great place to go. This was really a positioning cruise, and so on this trip we ignored the beautiful bays of Bantry Bay and Kenmare River and Dingle Bay, but still I think we had a good time. So the aim was to make sure that we got to Connemara, and Connemara is up here, which is another good leg north, because Connemara is the most extraordinary place to cruise in. Nicola arrived with 2 other members of the crew, regular crew, in Dartmouth on the 18th of May, and here we are getting the mainsail all ready to hoist as soon as we had left, just to leave the pontoon and go for an afternoon shakedown cruise to Salcombe. However, disaster. We got out in the river, got the mainsail halfway up, and it wouldn't go up any further, and it wouldn't come down either. And so, after 15 minutes after leaving our berth to set off for Ireland, we were back on our berth, ringing riggers and desperately trying to get it sorted out. A rigger did turn up, very helpfully, but he couldn't sort it that evening. But he did return the next morning and spent the morning, but by midday we had a temporary fix and we were ready to go again. So we had a lovely sail, very relaxed sail round to Newton Ferrers, where we spent the first night of the cruise in the pool at Newton Ferrers, and here's me looking slightly more relaxed than I was the day before. The next day was one of those extraordinary days. We set out at 6 o'clock in the morning thinking we'd go to the Helford River. But we set off in great style. The wind was initially about force 4 from the south, and then it increased to 5 to 6. We took a bit of sail in, and we were absolutely charging along. And we charged across Plymouth Sound all the way out to the Dodman, and we realised that we were going to get an awfully lot further than Helford if we wanted to. And so we said, okay, well, let's go to Mounts Bay. We rounded the Lizard at 10.5 knots over the ground, going like a train. And when we got halfway across Mounts Bay, we realised we could get to Scilly. And so we just carried on and arrived in Scilly about 9 o'clock in the evening. I think we did 103 miles in 14 hours, just over 7 knots, which is the most amazing sail. But here we are in Old Grimsby Sound, a very nice place on the east side of Tresco. Many of you know, Scilly is very rock-girt, and you have to be pretty careful with what you're doing, but it is a very, very rewarding place to sail. We had a lovely day ashore in Tresco, but it's pricey. I was quite staggered to be charged that the New Inn in Tresco was charging £19 for fish and chips and £17 for a crab sandwich, which is probably a lot more than that now. However, they had some Wi-Fi, and that helped me to submit the ghastly C1331 form. that you had to do then before you could go into the European Union. Fortunately, that's now been ditched. There's a slightly more civilized system, but the C1331 was a disaster, trying to fill in this Excel spreadsheet on your mobile phone and then find a good enough signal to send it. Completely crackers. Anyway, things are better now. Scilly's a place everybody should visit. I guess most people in this room have been at some stage or another, but if only for its perfect sunsets. This is us still in Old Grimsby Sound. And looking at the forecast for the next day, which was south to southwest, force 4 to 6. Wonderful for a crossing to Kinsale. However, we set off in great style and everybody very cheerful and thoroughly enjoying a cracking sail, but the 4 to 6 gradually increased 5 to 7 and we reefed down and it increased to 6 to 8 and it got horrendously rough. And we really had, about 14 hours of incredibly rough weather. But we made good progress and eventually it moderated in the evening and as we approached Ireland. I'm afraid there are no photographs of that crossing because we were a bit busy. But we did arrive in Kinsale to find ourselves alongside Wild Song, who some of you may know if you're in the Royal Cruising Club, which is poor Heine and Libby Purvis's boat, which lives across the pontoon from us in Dartmouth. It was quite funny to leave Dartmouth and then find them here when we arrived, but there we are. One of the interesting things about arriving in Ireland was I called the Coast Guard and said, what are we supposed to do when we arrive? Seeing we're entering the European Union. The Coast Guard said, I don't know. He said, I think you'd better just go and say hello to the harbour master. So when we arrived in Kinsale on Saturday lunchtime or Saturday morning, I potted along to the harbour master's office to find the door locked. And there were some fishermen fixing their nets on the quay, so I said, well, where will I find the harbour master? And they said, Monday. Well, I said, well, I'm not sitting here till Monday waiting for the harbour master to pull up. So we took down the Q flag and the next day we set off. Kinsale's a slightly eccentric place. I rather like it. Bear in mind this is last year, but it's still pretty appropriate. We had a good time exploring Kinsale. It was a great place to go, and we had a fantastic dinner in the Kinsale Yacht Club that evening. It was absolutely buzzing and packed to the gunwales and excellent food. It was a really nice evening. But the next day, we had to go. We had a sail round to Glandore. Somehow I didn't have a photograph of Glandore, and then on to Baltimore, which is a place obviously which one shouldn't miss. It was very windy, much windier than it looks here, and off the town, which is over here. These are the moorings off the town. It was just uninhabitable, so we moored just round the corner here under the lee of Shirkin Island, which is an absolutely gorgeous place. While we were there, we had a visit from the Irish Customs, who pulled up. A very nice chap came aboard in his tackety boots. I thought, they're not too good for my antique decks, but never mind. But he was a delightful chap and clearly find the whole process a penalty, whatever. The Irish clearly don't think very much of what's gone on between the UK and the EU. They just want it all to be over, but I guess we're stuck with it now. But he was very nice, and he had a cup of tea, and we had a long chat. That was fine. But Shirkin is absolutely lovely. You get some lovely views. This is looking across the entrance to Baltimore. And here we have Lot's known as Lot's Wife, the entrance day mark, otherwise known as Ireland's nuclear deterrent. And on Shirkin is this amazing natural harbour. It's called Horseshoe Bay. As you can see, a narrow entrance and a completely perfect horseshoe and a very, very sheltered anchorage, which I still haven't been into, but I must do it sometime. And the next morning we moved over to Baltimore for the crew to do a bit of shopping. They came back very depressed, said the answer to everything in the shop was, well, you'd have to go to Skibbereen for that. So, since we couldn't get to Skibbereen, we did with that. The next day we had a very wild sail. The wind was still sort of 5 to 6 to 7, and we had a wild sail among the islands of Long Island Bay. And Nicola was very keen to go to Skull. And we sailed into Skull, but it was so windy we couldn't actually pick up the mooring. Every time we tried to pick the mooring up, the boat sheared off and tried to pull us into the water, and it was just too dangerous. So we went and anchored and had lunch, and then moved on. And where we moved on to was here, which is Crookhaven, which is normally very sheltered and quite a good place to be, but today the wind was coming in from the northwest and it was coming straight down the anchorage, and it was just too dangerous to go ashore. So we sat on the boat all afternoon and looked at Dermot O'Sullivan's bar and couldn't get to it. It blew a full gale overnight, and the next morning it was still blowing a hoolie. So by midday we all had cabin fever, so we rang the pub and said, "Oh, any chance of getting a lift ashore?" So there was a call back about 5 minutes later from Dermot O'Sullivan himself. He said, "Oh, it's no trouble, boy, I'll just go out and fetch you in my father's fishing boat," which he did. And he duly came and dropped us ashore at his father's private jetty. And we walked along from his father's house, along through Crookhaven, and he says, "Oh, that's my restaurant over there. It's called Nottage. It's just opening tonight. You have a good meal there." And then we came to the shop, and he said, "And that's the shop, and I own the shop as well." And then we came to the pub, and he said, "Ah, here's my pub as well." And then he said, "Oh, that's my car around the corner there." He says, "If you want to borrow my car, the keys are in it. Just get in and go and enjoy yourselves, boys." So anyway, there we are. He's a cracking fellow. And we enjoyed his pub for a quick pint of Murphy's. Wonderful memorabilia in there, including, if you're a rugby fan, a signed Ireland rugby shirt belonging to Paul O'Connell. So we did actually borrow his car. We thought, oh, I think he means it. So we borrowed his car and we went off out to Mizzen Head to have a look and see how rough it was, and it was rough. And we were quite pleased that we were not outside in that trying to go around Mizzen Head. Mizzen Head, as you probably know, is the most southwesterly corner of the mainland of Ireland, and big tides run around it, and it's not a place to be in dirty weather, and it certainly wasn't a day for going around it that day. But we did have a lovely dinner in Nottage, where, bizarrely, the way things are bizarre in Ireland, the chef was Indonesian. And we lived in Indonesia, and that's where I met David Canning, who's one of my crew who's sitting over there. We were both in Indonesia at the same time in the early 80s. We had a bit of a crisis the next morning because some Frenchmen told us, with the wind still blowing a hoolie, told us they'd seen a flap of sail on our Yankee, and duly we unrolled it and found it was split from luff to leach, which was a bit of a crisis. And the sailmakers are pretty rare and few and far between on the west coast of Ireland, none between Schull and Galway. That was a bit of a problem, so we decided we'd have to press on to Dingle and get it fixed in Galway. But the forecast for the next morning was much better, and here we are, from the ridiculous to the sublime, I think you might say. Absolutely flat calm. But we had another 6 o'clock start and set off up the coast. Mizzen Head in the early morning, lovely morning, but no wind, and it was a pussycat that morning. And we set off going north. We had a bit of a discussion as to what to do, and the vote was, let's go out to the Skellings. And for those of you who haven't seen the Skellings before, they are the most remarkable islands. This is Skellig Michael, or the Great Skellig, and in medieval times it was inhabited by monks. And the monks lived here. You'll see a photograph of their housing in a minute. And as the logbook for Cruising Ireland, produced by the Irish Cruising Club, says, if you got tired of living in metropolitan Skellig, the busy life up here, there was a hut up here you could retire to for a bit of relaxation and peace and quiet. Read your book. They actually grew vegetables on this sort of saddle in the middle. It's the most extraordinary place. The landing place is just around here. This day there were quite a few boats landing. It's quite difficult to land there, but it is the most extraordinary place. You've got these paths cut through the hillside and some accommodation huts and the lighthouse here. It is the most extraordinary place. And on this slide you can just see up here the beehive huts, which are 1,000 years old plus or something, where the monks used to live. Quite an extraordinary place.
Is it possible to land there?
You can land, I would, because you can't anchor off, you just go and jill around. But there are tourist boats that come out from the mainland and they will drop you off for an hour or so, but there aren't many occasions when it's safe to land.
Robert Fellows.
What?
Robert Fellows landed there.
Did he? Oh well, he would do. He's braver than he was braver than me. Yeah. Now this is Little Skellig, Skellig Beg, which is the home to 40,000 pairs of gannets. It's an unbelievable sound and an even more unbelievable smell. The white that you see is mainly not guano, it's actually gannets. They don't quite show up there, but it's the most extraordinary place. So after leaving Skellig, still under engine because there was no wind, we potted into Valencia. It's still unfinished marina, it's been unfinished for, I don't know, 12, 15 years now. The taps are dry, there's no electricity, but at least there's somewhere to moor up alongside. If you haven't been to Valencia, I can recommend it. It's a most interesting place. All sorts of things to see there, and of course it's where the first transatlantic telephone was laid, cable was laid. And I was amazed, there's a little museum there. We went ashore for tea and cake and went to the museum where there's a whole lot of stuff about the cable, and I was amazed to find that the first cable didn't quite make it. It got 2/3 of the way across, but it was laid by the Agamemnon, you know, an old man of war. Extraordinary. And the successful one was laid by the Great Eastern, and the engineer on the Great Eastern was no less than David Canning's great-great-uncle.
Yeah.
Something like that. But anyway, it's quite a nice place. We frequently have people sketching on board, and here's Nicola hard at work. It is a very lovely place to go, and I do recommend it. And of course, good sunsets. I rather like that photograph. It's the Valencia lifeboat with the sun coming across it. Yeah. So we were running out of time now, having lost 3 days in Crookhaven, so we had to head. We woke to no wind again, and we had to motor across Dingle Bay, accompanied by dolphins, but sadly no fungi. You know, there was a very famous dolphin called Fungi who lived outside Dingle Harbour for about 20 years or more.
He disappeared recently.
Sorry?
He disappeared quite recently.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, he hasn't been seen for 2 years, so they think he's died or something happened to him. So, and here we are. Well, here's Dingle Harbour, which is a very nice marina, very friendly, very sheltered and very safe to be. It's a lovely place, changeable weather. We arrived in lovely sunshine and then suddenly here it is, a cloud pouring down over the hill. It's a good place to be. We packed up the Yankee and sent it off to repair, cleaned up the boat, had a nice dinner and then all went home. Here's Bagheera all tucked up for a week while I went home for our Village Platinum Jubilee picnic, which was good fun. So leg one was 446 miles, and then we all flew home from Kerry Airport. The airports in the west coast of Ireland are quite good fun. We were in the departure lounge at Kerry and somebody was saying, "Which gate are we going from? Which gate are we going from?" I said, "Wouldn't worry about that, there's only one." Just note, on the horizon here is the Eek Tower, which will feature a bit later. Remarkable place. So the next bit was to move the boat from Dingle down here, across the mouth of the Shannon here, up to the Aran Islands, and then up into this wonderful area of Connemara, and hoping to get a bit north into Clew Bay and places like that as well. So we returned to Dingle a week later and came back. The boat was all there and everything was fine. And we went to Super Value and stocked up and all ready to go, but the forecast was absolutely horrendous. And we arrived to end of strong winds, and here's Bagheera hunkered down with her raincoat on, and she was like that for on and off for 6 days. But Dingle's a funny place. I mean, I find lots to amuse me in Dingle. I love signs like this. You know, caution deep water and it's all dry land. But and bear in mind, this was around the time of the government was in complete chaos with Johnson's imminent departure. I love the thought of a Shih Tzu on patrol. You know, the Irish are caricatures of themselves in many ways. It's terrific. It's great fun. Fortunately, we did have a car available to us in Dingle because 2 of my crew had been touring in the west coast of Ireland before the cruise started, so they still had their car with them. So we were able to take advantage of the better days And there were some nice days, but it was just terribly windy. And we went up, a long walk up to this place called the Eek Tower. It's a slightly bizarre history. It was built by a Protestant clergyman in Dingle, and by building it, he thought he'd convert all the Catholics to Protestantism. Yeah, right. I don't know how that was. It used to have a big wooden signal arm on it, which pointed towards Dingle. Slightly bizarre. I told you where the entrance was, because it is, you can confuse the entrance to Dingle Harbour. But it's a wonderful place to go, because you get these spectacular views down over Dingle Bay and Dingle Harbour and the hills all around. And Bagheera is somewhere about there, I think. Yeah. And we had a wonderful view up there, day up there. This is Crow Rock, which sits on the direct line from Valencia to Dingle Harbour. A nasty trap for the unwary that you've got to be aware of. We had another lovely day along the south side of the Dingle Peninsula. The wind still blowing 5 to 7 from the southwest. And this is us looking out to the Blasket Islands from Slee Head. This is crew member Patrick, who's somewhere over there, who advised me that this is the bay where part of Ryan's Daughter was filmed. And so, being a cameraman, he was straight down there with his camera to take some pictures of it. But it is a very spectacular place, and it wasn't a day to be at sea. This is the Blasket Sound over here, through which you have to pass to go north up the coast of Ireland. You can see there's a big tide race here, and it just wasn't a place to be. We got caught by a torrential downpour coming back from the headland there. And this is us sheltering in an old World War II lookout. But it didn't shelter us very much. Rain was pouring in all over the place. At last, however, we got a decent forecast. And although it's still marginal, we decided we'd make a run for the Aran Islands. And here we are as crew member John helming as we come out of Dingle Harbour. That's the hills behind Dingle in the background. We're just heading down to the entrance. And the Blasket Sound was an absolute pussycat. It doesn't look it there, but it was actually very, very smooth as we came out in this extraordinary light. That's actually not a black and white photograph, it is colour. But it was a funny morning. It's a long 80-mile exposed crossing from Dingle out to the Aran Islands, across the entrance to the Shannon. And if you want to go to the Shannon for shelter, it adds about 30 miles onto the journey. And I've never done that. I just want to get across it and get up there. And we did charge along. It was a marginal day. The wind was most of the time around sort of 15 to 20 knots. But occasionally we get line squalls coming through, and you can see one here, one of these black line squalls coming through, and the wind would gust up to 25, 28, 30 knots for about 10 or 15 minutes. Then it dropped down to 15 to 20 again. It was quite an exciting sail. But we did average over 7 knots from leaving Blasket Sound to arriving in the Aran Islands. We did stop for a quick night in Kilronan on Inishmore, which is the, shall we say, the capital of Inishmore, but it's actually about the most one-horse town you can imagine. It's a pretty terrible place. But people do go to Inishmore primarily to see Dunangus, which is the most extraordinary Iron Age, I think it is, fort, right on the cliffs of Inishmore. And I'll show you some more pictures of that on the way back. If you've seen the Banshees of Inisherin, you will have seen part of it was filmed in Dunangus and all over Inishmore itself. It is the most... From Inishmore, we crossed to Roundstone, which is one of my favourite places in Connemara. I can't get enough of Roundstone. We had lovely dolphins playing around the boat. They're a feature of the cruise, really. We were always getting dolphins. And we had a nice sail across. And then
Great picture.
Not mine, I hasten to say. I can't remember whose that one is. I can tell you later. Probably Patrick's. Was it yours?
John's.
John was it? Oh yes, yeah. We had 2 professional cameramen on the trip. I think that was John. It is a lovely photograph, isn't it? Just they look so intelligent, don't they? And we sailed up what's called Bertrugbo Bay for lunch, and then we went into Roundstone, which is the most attractive place. You can see these sort of pastel coloured houses along the front, and it's always my first stop in Connemara. It's a appealing place, very photogenic, and of course it has O'Dowd's Seafood Bar and Restaurant, which is one of the most famous places on the west coast of Ireland to have a good evening, and it's really superb, very nice pub, but very good food. From there, we went across round Sline Head, which is quite a difficult headland. It can be very rough round Sline Head. You have to get the tide round it, can't go against it, and we sailed up to Inishbofin Island, which again is a must-go place on the west coast of Ireland. The entrance is very narrow. You pass within about 25 yards of that rock. There are rocks all in here, and there's now a sectored light, which makes it slightly easier, but the sector is so narrow that it's wiggling around trying to keep on the sector. But once you're inside, it's one of the finest harbours on the west coast of Ireland. It has indeed Cromwell's castle. Mr. Cromwell was a busy man. He built lots of these castles up and down the west coast of Ireland to keep the Irish under control. One of the features of sailing in Connemara is these mountains here, which are called the 12 Pins, which you see from over the place. You keep, wherever you go, you see the 12 pins from different angles. But this view is actually from Inishbofin. And we had a lovely walk around the west end of Inishbofin that day. We were quite surprised to find them cutting peat. I thought that peat cutting had been banned, but apparently still allowed for domestic purposes. But obviously, it's not always approved of. Quite rightly, I think. It was a pretty desolate landscape where they'd been cutting. But it's a great place, and you get wonderful views. This is looking up, further up. This is Achill Island up here, I think. Wonderful views from Inishbofin up the coast and up to all the other islands. The next day, I think it was the next day, yes, we went across to the mainland, and here we are in a place called Ballynakill, another view of the 12 Pins, and we anchored for the night in this wonderful place called Fahy Bay, which is described in the Irish Cruising Club Handbook as probably the best anchorage on the west coast of Ireland. And we had these amazing, spectacular skies. It was difficult to select what photograph to show, but I think that's probably the best of them. We had the whole bay to ourselves, apart from this Vancouver 28, which obviously lives there. And we had a glorious sunset to follow. As you can see, it's a very sheltered place. Glorious place to go. We then had to head south to get back to Clifton, where we were going to leave the boat for another trip home. And here we are approaching Clifton. This is a bit like between Scylla and Charybdis, this, because you've got a huge reef over here, but on the other side you've got another one, and you have to stick pretty close to the leading line, which in the way of many leading lines you can't see. But we did manage it, and this is us just going round the corner into Clifton Harbour. And here we are on a mooring in Clifton at the end of the second leg, which, because we were so delayed, we only managed 192 miles, and we didn't manage to do a lot of the things that we wanted to do. But, and the winds were between force 5 and 7 for I think the whole of the trip. So it was fairly, it was hard going. And then we flew back home from Knock Airport, which is another amazing place. I should have said that my brother-in-law Patrick, he left the boat in Inishbofin, and he had the most amazing multidisciplinary trip home. He went ashore by dinghy with me. He got the ferry to Cleggan on the mainland, a taxi to, what was the place called? Some place up in County Mayo. Then we got a bus to Knock Airport, a plane to Bristol, a bus from Bristol Airport to Temple Mills Station. Not Temple Mills, but yeah. A train to Paddington. What was the rest of it? A tube across London, a bus to Stoke Newington, which takes a bit of doing, really, doesn't it? That's what I call persistence. So, there we were in Clifton. It was very wild while we were in Clifton. We were quite worried, in fact, as to whether we were going to get off the boat in the morning to go home. The wind was still blowing at sort of 5 to 7, and it was coming straight down the bay and the visitors' moorings in Clifton now are not where they were when I was last there, and it was distinctly less hospitable. Still, we managed it. And when we arrived back with a new crew, including David, we were a bit worried as whether we'd get out to the boat at all because it was so rough. But we managed it in the end. So this bit of we had to get the boat back, and so there was no time to go further north. And so largely it was a matter of retracing our steps all the way back to Dartmouth. It's interesting to note that even after all those miles to get up here, we're still only just over halfway up the west coast of Ireland. It's a lot of coastline up there. First stop was back in Inishbofin, because everybody likes to go to Inishbofin. Again, it was blowing a hoolie, and we got stuck for a day in Inishbofin, another day lost on the cruise. Here we're sitting on the ferryman's mooring. There's a very nice chap who does the ferry from Inishbofin to the mainland, and for a bottle of wine or something you can use as mooring. He's a good guy. We did, it was very raining in the morning, but in the afternoon we got a walk, and this is an odd sight to see on a small island off the west coast of Ireland. This is the curry bus, and it's owned by an Asian family, and we did buy some very nice curry from it. A very good supper there. But you wonder how on earth they got a double-decker bus like that. But there it is. We also went back to Farney Bay. The weather wasn't so good, but again, it just offered the opportunity for these extraordinary photographs. And that again, it's actually a colour photograph, but the light was quite extraordinary. Amazing place. Thoroughly recommend it, even if you're not on a boat, just go. The weather forecast was just starting to show signs of improving, and we had a rattling sail back from Inishbofin round Sline Head, and here's Sylvia Chester's at the wheel, former member of the club, and an intrepid lady who has her own boat. And here we are, just going, that's Inishbofin in the background. We've just gone past High Islands, through High Island Sound. We're heading down through the very rocky coast, down back towards Roundstone again. We did stop in this lovely bay called Gortine Bay, which has the most amazing stretches of sandy beaches I think I've ever seen anywhere in Europe. Most extraordinary place. Wonderful shelter as well, not from the wind, but from the swell. And we had a nice little lunchtime stop before going round to Roundstone. And here we are, this is the 12 Pins again, this time viewed from Roundstone. And here's Bagheera anchored off Roundstone out the window of O'Dowd's Seafood Bar and Restaurant. Who'd have guessed? We had a wild sail back from Roundstone with the wind on our quarter. Again, probably going about 6 that day. And it was, we were quite pleased to have it behind us. 3 French boats going the other way weren't quite so lucky, and we were jolly pleased we weren't doing what they were doing because it was extremely wild. And we went and anchored in Portmurthy, which is a lovely sandy bay, as you can see, which just sits below Dunangus. Very sheltered from the south and west, not so good from the north and east, but we were perfectly happy to be there. Lovely sandy bottom and very sheltered. And we all went ashore to walk up to Dunangus. Now the reason for this picture is because of this footbridge, which I find interesting. Properly constructed concrete bridge is a stone path, and then what it crosses is a little dry ditch. About that deep. Why do they put all that there just for a dry ditch? And then you get up to the top of Dunangus and you go in here, and this is what you get. No handrail there. And it's about a 200-metre drop, I think, off the edge into the sea from Dunangus, the most remarkable place. And again, something well worth a visit if you're anywhere near that part of the world. And here's our Leg 3 crew, sitting on this sort of feature inside Dunangus, which is like a sort of, I think it's probably a sacrificial slab where they used to chop people up and things. But anyway, it's a nice place to take a rest. We were very lucky we had a conducted tour of the whole thing from a bored guide who was looking for something to do. But it is fun. But the landscape of Inishmore is just unbelievable. Why people wanted to live on Inishmore, I can't even begin to imagine, because that's one of the grassier bits. Extraordinary place. Anyway, the next that evening we went back round to Kilronan, to the anchorage, main anchorage, just to give us a bit of a flying start the next day because we were going back to Dingle. And here we are, charging across again in about force 5 to 6, Bagheera doing 7.5 knots, heading back towards the Blaskets. A great sail, a bit rough again, and some terrific line squalls, but it was a good sail. Brandon Mountain is a feature of this coast. I think it's about 2,700 feet or something. Very unusual to see it without a cap of cloud. It was actually visible from Inishmore, some 70 miles away, and we first saw it even from Bagheera, 35 miles away. So it's quite a feature of the coastline. And this is just us going into Blasket Sound. Sylvia at the helm, watchman keeping an eye out on the leading marks, and we managed to sail through it against the tide. We did have another break in Dingle for a day, and then we returned to Valentia via the went to Valentia and then out past the Skellings again. David was very keen to go and have a look at the museum in Valentia to see what records there were of his relative, and in fact we found quite a lot, didn't you? Mentions of his role in the successful laying of the cable from the Great Eastern. The Skellings were shrouded in mist that day, but the forecast was terrific, and as we closed the mainland, the clouds started to roll away, and we went into this wonderful anchorage of Derrynane, which really is the most perfectly sheltered harbour on the entrance is up here, and there's islands all the way around it, and you never get any swell or any sea in there at all. It's a lovely, lovely spot. I spent most of my time in Derrynane clearing the heads, which are blocked. Not the thing to be doing in Derrynane. But it is lovely, lovely place for families because you've got these amazing beaches. This is my sort of Robinson Crusoe picture. And this is the old ruined chapel where Daniel O'Connell is buried, who was one of the original freedom fighters of Ireland, a remarkable man. He was locked up in Dublin jail, and the British eventually said, "Oh, I think we're going to let you out." And he said, "No, I think I'll stay in for a day until they can organise a huge reception for me when I come out." And I think there were something over 1 million people lined the streets when he was released. He had a bit of an ego, Daniel O'Connell. With the fantastic forecast, we set off to explore the Kenmare River and Bantry Bay, and we had the most glorious day in the Kenmare River, ghosting up the river. We caught a 4-pound pollock on the way and lost another one, and anchored in Sneem, which again is the most beautiful spot. Water's warm, and the geriatric members of the crew here are over the side having a swim. And these are the McGillicuddy's Reeks, which form a backdrop to Sneem Harbour, little oyster pier over here, and it is just beautiful, beautiful scenery. Last time I was there, all the rhododendrons were out all around the anchorage, but sadly this time they weren't. But it is a super, super spot. We were quite tempted to stay there for the night, but there was another anchorage I wanted to explore, which is a place called Kilmacilloch. And we had to weave our way through loads of fish farms to get there, but it really was a splendid place, completely isolated. There were a couple of boats on moorings, and this is the crew waiting impatiently for their pollock cutlets. He was just about still floundering around on the bottom of the boat, but we had a lovely evening there. And the next morning, still we get these little cloud caps in the morning, and it just produced the most beautiful effect. This is an old Watson lifeboat, painted green, interestingly. But it is the most breathtaking spot, and it was well worth going across to see it. No wind again the next morning. Good weather, but no wind. You can see we went motoring down the Kenmare River with the whole range of the McGillicuddy's Reeks behind us. Absolutely spectacular scenery. To get from the Kenmare River into Bantry Bay, the quickest way is to go through Dursey Sound. You have to go under the cable car, which goes across to Dursey Island. Cable car clearance is 21 metres. My mast, I think, is 19, I think. But it certainly looks as though it's not too much clearance as you go under it. But we made it. And we went into Bantry Bay and up to this lovely little place called Lawrence Cove Marina, which some of you may have been to. It's a super place, family run. There's a lovely lady who runs it, And she comes, when she sees a boat coming in, she comes sprinting down the gangway along to take your water, skirts flying in the breeze, and it's all great fun. Nothing's locked, everything's open. It's a great place to go. And we had a very convivial evening there with the Irish Cruising Club, who were just finishing their annual West Coast cruise. We've been meeting them at various points down the coast, but they had a big barbecue, and we enjoyed a few drinks with them. This is another place I like to go to, Adrigole. First harbour as you go up Bantry Bay towards Glengarriff, you come to this place, which is dwarfed by this enormous mountain called Hungry Hill, which hangs over the bay and gives its backdrop. Another good place for a swim. We then carried on round from there. We went back all the way back into Crookhaven. So you can see the conditions are slightly different this time because we had a mission to perform. This is Dermot O'Sullivan being presented with the little ship club burgee that we gave him for all his hospitality when we were on the way around. And he's quite a character. He really is. Terrific bloke. And that photograph won David Canning's second prize in the Little Ship Club photo competition. He didn't know it because I put it in, but it's his photograph. And it's the only photograph he has of the cruise because later on, when we got
my phone.
Yeah, he dropped his phone overboard, so that's the only photograph we have. So, anyway, it won second place in the prizes. From there back to Baltimore, because on the way we hadn't managed a pilgrimage to Bush's Bar. And Bush's Bar is one of the great sailing pubs of the world, in my view. And if you watch Saving Lives at Sea, there was a recent episode which was based on the Baltimore lifeboat, and that's the office of the Baltimore lifeboat, Bush's Bar. They all meet there and socialise there together. But it is a splendid pub. It's not changed since I first went there about 28 years ago, I think. It's been painted, but that's about all. Still in family ownership. We then rattled along the coast back to Kinsale for a quick night. It's a good jumping off point for the Celtic Sea crossing. And here we are leaving Kinsale in the early morning in slightly different weather from the way we came across. It was glorious sunshine. There's Ireland dropping astern, and we had the wind on the quarter rattling across the Celtic Sea again. I do the odd bit of work on these cruises. I think it's me. No, it isn't. It's you, David. It's you. What are you doing at my chart table?
Sneaking in.
Yeah. You can see that it's so good that even the fruit bowl wasn't falling over. So, good Lord, somebody's been drinking a beer on the way. Yeah, so it was a very nice crossing, sunshine all the way. Here we are coming around the Lizard in the early afternoon. And as we came around the Lizard, after the gentle winds of the crossing, it got extremely windy and we had a wild beat up from the Lizard back up to Falmouth and into St Mawes, where we moored for the night. The oyster boats had been out racing, and they really are the most splendid sight, and they don't have to race them hard. What I have seen, last time I was in St Mawes, we were there in the winter, and I saw them dredging for oysters, because they still dredge for oysters under sail in these boats. In the winter they dredge for oysters, in the summer they race and drink. St Mawes in the early sunshine. We then headed off from St Mawes and had pretty well motored all the way back to Newton Ferrers. Here we are in the Thorn Pool, celebrating our return to home waters. And David very kindly picked up the mooring for us, but as we said, lost his phone over the side while he was doing it, which was very sad. But the Yelm is the most beautiful river, and I never tire of going to the Yelm. It is wonderful, and here's the light just fading in the Thorn Pool up the river. So from there, it was really just a jog around the corner. Here we are coming across Stark Bay with a slightly strange sky, and landfall, the Homestone Buoy, the entrance to the River Dart. 672 miles on leg 3. It was a super leg, really. We were certainly the luckiest with the weather, and we had a really good time. The total cruise was 1,310 miles, and it had indeed been a wild trip, with 9, I think, complete days lost due to weather, which is completely unprecedented for me. I've been up the Irish coast many times, but that was unprecedented. It was pretty tough on the crew and quite hard on me as well, but it was worth it. And thank you to my loyal crew, all of them here tonight. And thank you for their wonderful photographs, because most of them are not mine. And there we are. Thank you very much. Have a good summer.
Thank you very much indeed, David. What a great adventure, and some absolutely wonderful photographs. We have a little time for some questions if you have. We must be on time though for dinner, for the fish in the dining room at 8 o'clock. But if you have any questions for David.
Yes, if you hadn't lost your 9 days, would you have gone further?
Yes, we'd have gone up to, I wanted to go to Killary Bay, which is a very famous fjord, where you go miles, about 10 miles up the fjord. I wanted to go there just for interest. I wanted to go to Clew Bay, which is a whole bay full of islands. I don't know how many islands there are in Clew Bay. It's an archipelago. Quite shoal water, it's quite difficult, but I just wanted to go and explore that. But maybe again, I don't know. We'll see.
A great history tour as well.
Yeah.
John?
Quite late in the year, September, sometime you went?
No, it was early. We left in May.
Okay, so early part. So
The first trip was 2 weeks from May the 18th.
and the weather was very unusual then. So
Sorry.
you planned to have a nice sail.
Well, no. Yeah, I mean, you can reckon if you go up that coast, you're going to lose 1, 2, 3 days perhaps at that time of year. But to be stuck in Dingle for 6 days was just crazy. There were several other boats there as well, and nobody else left the whole time we were there. So it wasn't us just being cheap. In fact, we were the first boat to leave. But, great fun. Yeah. I have been further north because I did do a round island trip in 2015, so it is good fun further north as well.
Steve?
Yeah, are there chartering opportunities? I mean, it's so seductive what you've just said. It's been
There are.
brilliant.
They charter out of Skull, Cork, Kinsale. Don't know about Baltimore. Skull, I'm almost sure. I think there's somebody in Galway. I don't think there's anybody in Dingle. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's nobody in Dingle. There aren't many places because they're just wary about inexperienced sailors in that area, because you can't get yourself into trouble.
Yeah,
But I recommend it.
Kinsale is quite a big charter place.
Yeah.
We've chartered from there twice. I mean, 20 years ago.
But the thing you find is that people who charter from Kinsale, most of them just do the bit of coast between Kinsale and Tusker Rock. Once you go around Mizzen Head, you just don't see anybody. No. My last trip, when we went round Ireland, I remember on one occasion we went 3 days without seeing another boat of any kind. Extraordinary, just deserted.
It does look very much like the wild side. I must admit. It's a great place for cruising. I have a quick question too. When you're anchorages, do you have to pick up a mooring buoy, or can you rely on the anchor holding you in most places? Is it something that you have to be very careful, in other words, about where you're anchoring?
Yes. That's the answer. I mean, there are a few visitors' moorings. There are visitors' moorings in Clifton. There are none in Inishbofin, none in Ballynakill, Fye Bay, places like that. So you have to make sure, if you're going to be on your anchor, you've got a good anchor and lots of chain. And mine's a £65 CQR and 10mm chain, and lots of it, 60 metres of it. And you've just got to be careful about the seabed, what's going on, and make sure it's something that's going to hold.
Yeah. Any other questions before we adjourn for dinner? Nicola.
I haven't got a question, but obviously a lot had to be left out because of us. And one of the things that's left out is that David's actually a really good cook. And
Don't tell Diana!
Well, you need to know. Anyway, but someone, I think it was, maybe David, one of the crew was in a photograph with a photographic competition. And it said, was that yours?
Yeah.
It was yours. You can tell the story then. It was
Well, the skipper who looks after his crew.
yeah,
With Toad in the hole on that occasion.
Having sailed with David before, I can vouch for that. We did a wonderful trip from Padstow to Portishead, I think, wasn't it?
We did,
We didn't stop
And
at Lundy.
from-
We passed Lundy,
And
Swansea,
from Cork
Cardiff.
to the Isle of Man.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It was a really interesting talk. Thank you.
Can I just say that it's fish